Welcome. This is the first of 3 sessions examining hope against hope, exploring the 2 principal shapes of hope expressed in the Bible, and exploring further into a deeper form of hope, a hope beyond hope. My name is Len Bowman, and I'll be your guide in this brief exploration. My background is in theology and literature, including quite a bit of Bible study. Oh, and of course I've written a book on the subject, published in 2001. I'm not recommending that you read it. This series distills its contents. The topics of our 3 sessions will be apocalyptic hope, most obvious in the book of Revelation, what I call cosmic hope, less obvious but pervasive in the Bible, looking forward to some kind of universal harmony, and hope beyond hope, a form of hope evident especially in the stories of the resurrection of Jesus, that is deeper than either of these others. So this first session will focus on apocalyptic hope. First, we'll explore the 2 basic models of time to understand why hope is prominent in the Bible, but not so much in, for instance, the holy writings of India. Then we'll see how apocalyptic hope is expressed in the Bible. Next, we'll look at how apocalyptic hope plays out in the attitudes of people who are caught up in it, and then we'll talk about the occupational hazards of this form of hope. And yes, suggesting that there are such occupational hazards implies that this form of hope is limited and partial and incomplete. So is the other form of hope, cosmic hope, limited, partial, incomplete. What? Does that mean the Bible is wrong? It means that the Bible, and all the world's sacred writings for that matter, often speaks in paradox. 2 apparently opposing points of view are both affirmed. Either one without the other is incomplete and so misunderstood. Both must be understood together. This is a special kind of logic, the logic of the balance of opposites, most dramatically expressed in the Taoist symbol of yin and yang. So, let's take a moment to consider the 2 basic ways that people imagine that time is structured. The most ancient model of time is cyclic. It's the pattern of the seasons, after all, of the cycles of the moon. Earliest human cultures thought of time as a circle, revolving from birth to death, but then to rebirth and death and rebirth, endlessly. The Hindu tradition of India thought of each human soul cycling from life to life over years, over centuries even, cycling in a larger cycle of years called a yuga, which can last thousands and thousands of years. Each yuga cycles within a greater cycle, a mahayuga, within which each yuga is weaker than the one before, leading to a dissolution of the entire universe and its recreation. This is the endless cycle of births and deaths that the Buddha called the miserable cycle of births and deaths, samsara. And the whole point of life is to escape this miserable cycle, an extinction called nirvana. That, briefly, is the cyclic model of time. The other model is called linear. In contrast to Hindu thought, to Western minds, the time of a person's life is like a straight line from birth to death. Traditional Christianity opens up the end of that line to the 4 last things: death, judgment, and heaven or hell. Hell, by the way, is part of the apocalyptic worldview. Yes, it's an incomplete perspective. Just as with personal life, Western minds see world history like a line, from in the beginning to the end of the world, from Alpha to Omega. Now, while we can see the basis for cyclic time in the seasons and the cycle of the moon, where might we find the basis for linear time? The pattern of an individual life is the same for all, so what's different in the West? As it says in the book of Genesis, "Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation." This, God's promise to Abraham, is the keynote for the whole of the Hebrew Scriptures and the background for the New Testament as well, and yes, the Quran too. It also sets up a distinctive pattern of time, from promise to fulfillment, a line. And within that pattern of time, it implies an orientation not as with cyclic time back toward an eternal return of the same, but forward, toward the future. Hope is an attitude toward the future. But it's not the only attitude toward the future. There's also expectation, focused on some specific desired outcome that might even use the word hope, as in, I hope my friend gets the job she's applying for. Of course, if things don't turn out that way, expectation turns into disappointment. Then there's optimism, not focused on a particular outcome, but viewing the future positively as full of promise and empty of danger. Of course, a few years in the school of hard knocks can turn an optimist into a pessimist. Hope is different. Yes, hope is trust in the future, but it does not ignore risks and dangers, nor does hope focus on a specific desired outcome. Some pair hope with its, quotes, opposite, despair. But that doesn't quite work, for the relation of hope and despair is not proportional to, say, expectation and disappointment. You see, hope is not so easily extinguished. For hope, real hope, rises up beyond despair. How can that be, you wonder? You will see, but only after facing hope against hope and reaching toward hope beyond hope. That leaves us with the question about that future, especially the end of time. What's it like? What is Omega like? The Bible suggests two very different answers, just as different as the two different meanings of the word end, destruction and extinction, or final purpose or completion. One answer is apocalyptic. The other I call cosmic, for it points toward universal reconciliation. That one's for the next session, though. So much for our models of time. Pause for a moment to reflect and let these ideas percolate. In this session, we're looking at apocalyptic hope. So now let's consider apocalyptic hope as it's expressed in the Bible. The only full-blown apocalyptic writing among the canonical books of the Old Testament is in the book of Daniel. That describes horrendous wars, oppression, false prophets, and ultimate judgment, while encouraging God's people to remain faithful and endure to the end when they will be vindicated. That same pattern of apocalyptic expectation runs through the New Testament, especially in what's called the Apocalyptic Discourse in the Gospels, except John, and of course, the book of Revelation. If you happen to be familiar with the timeline of the Bible, a question may be forming in your mind. The Old Testament is, after all, rather large, dating, oral traditions at least, way back as far as 1200 years before the Common Era. But Daniel is very late, probably from the Maccabean period, the 2nd century before the Common Era. If apocalyptic hope is so important, why does it show up so late? Further, you may begin to form another question. Where did apocalyptic hope come from? The key elements of apocalypticism, cosmic conflict of good versus evil, an end of the world, final victory and judgment, are all found in Zoroastrianism, a religion arising in the 7th century before the Common Era, Persia. Of course, it was the Persian Empire that sheltered the Hebrew people until their defeat by the Greek Alexander the Great in the late 4th century BCE. So the Hebrews were familiar with Persian religion. Let me summarize the main elements of apocalyptic hope in the Bible. First, apocalypticism is a cry of the oppressed. The book of Daniel comes from the Maccabean period, a time when the Hebrew people were subjugated by the Greeks to the point that the emperor forced a statue of Zeus to be placed in the Jerusalem temple. Apocalyptic fervor was strong under the later Roman occupation, peaking when the Romans destroyed the Jerusalem temple in 70 of the Common Era, and it was about that time that the Gospel of Mark was written. The fervor peaked again during the persecutions in the late 1st century of the Common Era, when the book of Revelation was written. Apocalypticism is the cry of the oppressed. All of life and all of history is understood as a battle of evil against good, the good being underdog, the evil, the oppressor. Through oppression and suffering, the good must remain steadfast in pure faith in God, their deliverer. They must avoid contamination by the evil forces of the world. The reign of evil will ultimately lead to a cosmic upheaval, the destruction of everything that makes for a livable world. There are signs, indicators, that warn the faithful of the coming catastrophe and hint at their ultimate victory. But false signs, false prophets, false messiahs will arise. Do not be misled. Stay firm in the faith. Hope in God alone. No earthly power can be trusted. Keep yourself pure from the evil world, and we who endure to the end will triumph. In the final judgment and destruction, those who remain steadfast in faith will shine like the sun. All others will be condemned or destroyed. So hang on. So that's the shape of apocalyptic hope in the Bible. Pause a moment to reflect on that. So let's look now at how apocalyptic hope plays out in the attitudes of people who are caught up in it. Apocalyptic beliefs result in a clear set of attitudes in persons who seriously adhere to them. Those beliefs color the way persons or group regard themselves, the way they regard other persons or groups, and the way they regard society and the physical natural world. First, regarding themselves. Believers must keep themselves pure, pure in an unsullied faith, pure from any influence from or compromise with the adversary. Pure faith is in the revealed Word of God, in church doctrines, and in moral absolutes. Believers must hope in God alone. Only God can overcome the adversary. Any earthly powers are likely in service to the adversary. Believers must expect conflict and expect to be oppressed. They must prepare and spiritually arm themselves for this conflict. Believers know that provided they keep their faith pure, refuse compromise, and endure through oppression, they are the saved and will triumph in the end. All others will be lost or condemned. God has revealed the secrets of the end time and of the adversary. That revelation is in a kind of code that is hidden from all but the saved. Using imaginative interpretations of the Bible, the saved can heed the signs and prepare for the judgment. Regarding others, pure faith is the touchstone by which fellow believers can be distinguished from those who are deceived by the adversary. Any dissent from true teaching is the mark of the adversary. Always expecting conflict and oppression, believers are vigilant and regard others with suspicion, if not hostility. Questions or challenges to their belief are interpreted as forms of oppression. From their interpretation of the secret prophetic code, believers are alert to the disguises of the adversary, and so they seek to expose and resist the adversary wherever and in whomever he may appear. Believers ignore or reject anything that belongs to or has compromised with the adversary. That includes, for some, non-biblical explanations of the world, like science, and any dilution of their clearly defined faith. Any movement toward world unity is for them an obvious work of the adversary. Since they're intensely aware of the coming judgment, believers are likely to challenge others to join them in their faith, warning others that otherwise they're being deceived by the adversary and so are liable to be lost or condemned. Regarding society in the physical and natural world, believers expect the world as we know it to be destroyed or transformed at the end time, and they expect the end time to come soon. Therefore, environmental concerns are not a priority. Some who hold apocalyptic beliefs look forward eagerly to a final battle as the end of the world that will bring the Savior and the victory of God. So they're likely to encourage hardline military postures, for instance in Israel, against any compromise with the Muslim Palestinians. Others think that the end will come as a judgment of God on a sinful nation or world. In the United States, the key indicator of that sinfulness is sexual permissiveness, especially abortion and homosexuality. Some even attack sex education in the schools with apocalyptic fervor. Some who hold apocalyptic beliefs consider the world and society a lost cause and so separate themselves from society as much as possible, either by interacting socially only with fellow believers and shunning others, or by physical separation in some kind of enclave. Some hold to the doctrine of the rapture, expecting believers to be snatched up safe from the world's final battle and then to return to share in a reign of peace, usually expected to last 1,000 years. Others seek to transform society by ensuring that believers are in control of government and economy. In the United States, one such movement is called Christian dominionism. In seeking to ensure that beliefs govern society, believers maintain their unsullied faith and refuse compromise. The apocalyptic attitude may influence people's habits of thought, even though they don't subscribe to apocalyptic beliefs. This anonymously apocalyptic attitude has these characteristics. Life is basically conflict and competition. There's always two sides, and being on the right side or in the right group is of ultimate importance. All problems are due to the wrong side, so the way to solve problems is to oppose and defeat the wrong side. Then the problem will go away. To live means placing one's trust in a reality or power beyond the individual, a great leader, the nation, church, economic system, cultural system, social class. One's identity is entirely a matter of belonging to that reality. There are winners and losers. Winners don't have to worry about what happens to losers. Truth and right are definite and clear. Any ambiguity is obviously false. Any challenge or question is an attack. Any compromise is a betrayal of principle. In relating to others, the main thing is to determine whether the other person is a friend or a foe, and that can be determined by moral or political touchstones, like abortion or marriage equality or gun control. If the other person is a foe, ignore him and move on, but watch your back. Since this form of hope is partial and incomplete, it comes with occupational hazards. The occupational hazards or dangers of apocalyptic hope and the apocalyptic attitude are probably evident to you unless you happen to be immersed in apocalyptic hope yourself. First, apocalyptic hope is really a form of expectation, and over the centuries it has led to disappointment after disappointment. Most serious and most obvious is that belief that all reality is conflict between good and evil is polarizing. It divides all humanity between us, good people, and them, evil people, tools of the adversary. It's judgmental. It focuses on identifying evil, usually through rigid moral absolutes, and thereby manages to forget that the morality of the New Testament is essentially positive, to love one another. Since it judges others as linked with the adversary, apocalyptic hope fosters hatred and even violence, ranging from hate crimes to war. Then there's the apocalyptic mistake, blaming others, or blaming all problems on an evil one, eliminating the evil one, most likely through some form of violence, and then thinking the problem is solved. The classic case is the Second Iraq War. President George W. Bush thinking that eliminating Saddam Hussein would turn Iraq into a Western-style democracy. Mission accomplished, you know. That's a formidable set of occupational hazards. Note that this whole set of ideas and attitudes form a logically coherent system, a complete ideology. That means it's almost impossible to engage in rational dialogue or debate with its adherents. It also means that for adherents to question themselves can be traumatic. Might apocalypticism be a self-fulfilling prophecy, bringing about the very evil it seeks to avoid or prevent, actually becoming the very adversary it vows to combat? Historically, apocalyptic movements have typically ended in tragedy. Next time, we'll look at the other principal form of hope in the Bible, cosmic hope, which is also limited, partial, and incomplete.